All right. Our first presentation this morning is presented has been put together by a large team of international experts that is led by Dr. Stephen Ryesen of Texas A&M at Commerce, and he will be doing the presentation today on empirically testing the validity of otaku stereotypes. Dr. Ryesen, if you please.
Sure. Thank you. Hello, I'm Stephen. I'd like to thank my co-authors, Kathy, Nuka in the middle, and Sharon, and my undergraduate students who come, well, they're no longer undergraduates, but they come with me to cons every year and help do the hard work on the ground, handing out surveys and collecting them. So I'm part of a group of, as we were just saying, a group of researchers. If you Google the Anime Research Project, you can find our website. On there, you can download a book that we wrote last year. It is free to download. And so what we do is once a year, we'll do a survey of anime fans. And the next survey for this year is coming up in August. So on our website, if you want to sign up for an email list, I'll shoot out an email anytime there's a big change in the project, but also when the survey comes out this year. So today we're talking about otaku, and what I did was go through the literature. So this is the academic literature, looking for definitions and descriptions and research about otaku. Here are some of the definitions, and they kind of fell into these different themes. So the first one was linked to some sort of content. So otaku were defined in terms of subcultures, linked to anime, video games, computers, and on and on. It's basically, the definition focuses on what the person is interested in. Another definition of theme was passion, so enthusiastic collectors of something. Another theme was devotion, so a person who is very dedicated. And in this definition, they're usually male fans of anime. Another theme in the definitions in the literature was some sort of revolving around obsession. So in this example, the person is addicted to something. And then another theme in the definitions was relationships. So basically lacking relationships with other people. We've also went through various descriptions in the academic literature of otaku. For example, they were described as fanatical, introversion, sitting alone in class, friendless, and having a gloomy expression, isolated and socially inept, antisocial, which I doubt, well, occasionally violent. I was going to say the clinical definition of antisocial is a little different than how people typically use it. But obsessive fanatics who make their hobby their life, single, straight, poorly dressed, and physically unattractive middle-class young man with no social skills and a childish yet prudent fascination with cartoons. Generally speaking, otaku are not described very nicely in the literature. So the data I'm going to be presenting today is across 4 different data sets in 4 different years that we've been running this study. As you can see, a good majority of them tend to be from the United States. That's because our survey is conducted in English. So if you do not speak English, you are probably not in our data. Also tend to be male, tend to be white. And we find from year to year, the levels of people who self-identify, they click a box saying that I am an otaku, goes up and down, but it's generally around 30% of our samples self-describe themselves as otaku. So we went through 36 different stereotypes that were in the literature about otaku. And so I'm going to try to move this along at a semi-good pace, but we'll see. But we got to go through 36 of these that we had data on. And what we're doing in terms of whether or not we say it is supported, the stereotype is supported or not, is does it distinguish otaku from other anime fans who do not describe themselves as otaku? And then where do they fall on the measure, whatever that measure is? And that's how we determined whether or not we would say a stereotype is supported. So I think everybody knows what stereotypes are. It's generally a belief about a group of people. And so the reason we're saying, well, it should be a distinguishing thing, from other anime fans would be that, well, it wouldn't be a very useful stereotype if it did not distinguish one group from another. So first stereotype, otaku are young. So we compared the ages of people who self-described as otaku versus anime fans who did not self-describe as otaku. And as you can see, those means are very similar to one another. They were not significantly different. So yes, otaku do tend to be young, but it was not a distinguishing feature from other anime fans. So we gave that stereotype, we said partial support for the stereotype because they were young, but it's not necessarily distinguishing. Otaku are male is another stereotype. So we got the sex of in our surveys. We find that that anime fans is about 70% male, whereas otaku it was 67%. So yes, the majority of otaku are male, but again, it's not significantly different or a distinguishing feature of the group. So we gave it partial support. Another stereotype, this one had two different stereotypes. One was otaku tend to be fat, and another stereotype from a different person was otaku tend to be thin. So we got the body mass index of anime fans. By the way, there's what the average anime fan was. So otaku's BMI was 28, and it was not significantly different from non-otaku anime fans. But the stereotype was their otaku tend to be either fat or thin. So we made a little figure of it, and what you would expect to see is bimodal. If a group of people who tend to be really thin and a group of people who tend to be fat, and there should be a dip in the middle. We did not see that. So that stereotype was not supported. Not only was it not distinguishing, but we didn't see any evidence for it at all. Another no, we're going to get through 36 of these. Otaku are single or not in a relationship. And what we found is there's no significant difference in terms of the number of otaku who are single versus anime fans. But that is above the midpoint, which would be 50%. So a majority of otaku are single, but it was not a distinguishing feature of otaku, so we give it partial support. Otaku are straight or heterosexual, and what we found was that there's not a significant difference in the number who identified as straight or heterosexual. So it's not distinguishing, but it is above the midpoint, so it is a majority, so we give it partial support. Otaku are middle class. So we measured middle class, or where you would fall on that spectrum, three different ways. The first way was we asked, well, how much money do you make? And so otaku and non-otaku did not differ in the amount of money that they make. Another measure was the number of bathrooms in your childhood home, the idea being that the more bathrooms you had in your home, the wealthier your family was. And what we see here is that the mean number of bathrooms in their childhood home did not differ from non-otaku anime fans. And then another measure we use is the ladder, which you can see on the screen, where we say within your society, whatever society you live in, the lowest rung 1 is the poorest people in your country, and 10 is the wealthiest people. Where would you fall on that ladder? And otaku fell around the midpoint. But it did not differ from non-otaku. So yes, otaku do tend to be middle class, but it was not a distinguishing feature, so we give it partial support. Otaku live with their parents. So we have very little difference between the percentage of otaku and non-otaku anime fans who live with their parents. And it was below the midpoint, so they're in the minority. So, and especially if you restrict it to only people over the age of 25, that number goes way down, living with their parents. That stereotype not supported. Otaku are neats. So what we did was we asked anime fans to say, well, what is your job? As you can see, anime fandom tends to be young. So a lot of people were students or currently students in college. And most importantly, a very low percentage of anime fans are not working or in school. So that stereotype was not supported. Otaku are not athletic. So we measured this in a few different ways with the data that we had over the years. And what we find is that otaku were significantly less likely to indicate being a sport fan. They played less sports, and they liked sport less. So we gave that one support, and the otaku are not necessarily athletic. Otaku are introverted. Anime fans in general tend to be fall on the introversion extroversion spectrum. They tend to fall on the introverted side, but they did not differ. Otaku did not differ from non-otaku anime fans. So yes, they do tend to be introverted, but it's not a distinguishing feature, so partial support. Otaku are socially awkward around non-fans. And what we found is otaku did rate higher, significantly higher than non-otaku anime fans, but it is still well below the midpoint of the measure. So we said that one's not supported. Otaku do not have friends. We looked at it, on average, it's people have if you go back into the research, about 8 or 9 friends, close friends. And otaku and non-otaku, the number of friends they had, the mean did not significantly differ. And that's right around what you would see in the literature in terms of the number of friends a person has. So that stereotype isn't supported. The one difference we did find here was we also asked, of your friends, how many are anime fans also. And otaku did have one more anime friend on average than non-otaku anime fans. Otaku have poor hygiene. So we had a measure about, how well do you keep up with your hygiene? And otaku and non-otaku did not differ, and they were below the midpoint of the measure. So they believe, at least otaku are saying they have good hygiene, so that is not supported. Otaku are immature. We created a measure of maturity and handed it out, and pretty much otaku and non-otaku both believe that they're mature. They perceive themselves as mature, and that is above the midpoint of the scale, so that stereotype was not supported. Otaku are nerds or geeks. Otaku did score higher, rating themselves as nerds than non-otaku, and it is above the midpoint, so that stereotype is supported. Otaku are gatekeepers of fandom-related knowledge. Otaku did score higher in terms of saying, I have some really obscure knowledge about anime. Otaku did rate higher in terms of their self-perceived knowledge of the industry, anime industry. And otaku did rate higher in their perception of their knowledge of Japanese culture. And those are all above the midpoints of the measure. So we said that one supported. Otaku share the word through word of mouth. And otaku rated themselves as saying, yes, they do spread knowledge about anime to others. And that is slightly above the midpoint. So we said that one supported. Otaku are obsessed with anime. So we had a measure of self-obsession. So how obsessed are you? And otaku did rate themselves higher than non-otaku, and that is above the midpoint. So we said that one is supported. Otaku develop strong connections with their favorite characters. So we had a measure of identification with your favorite character, and otaku did score significantly higher than other anime fans, and that is above the midpoint. So we said that stereotype is supported. Otaku get really immersed in anime. So we got a measure of immersion into media and asked fans to rate how immersed they are when they're watching anime. And otaku did rate themselves significantly higher than non-otaku anime fans in terms of how immersed they feel when they're watching anime. That's above the midpoint, so that stereotype is supported. Otaku are science fiction fans. So we had anime fans self-identify as a science fiction fan. And there wasn't much of a difference between otaku and non-otaku anime fans, and it was below the midpoint, so we said that one is not supported. I know 36 of these, y'all. Otaku are gamers. So we asked about gaming in different ways in terms of what device that they're gaming on. So we found no difference for casual gaming. There was a difference. Otaku were significantly higher for console gaming, and they were also significantly higher for PC gaming. And they were significantly higher for esports. So we said, and especially for the PC gaming, that is well above the midpoint. So we said that stereotype is supported. Most otaku cosplay. Otaku did cosplay significantly more than non-otaku, but it was below the midpoint, 50%, so we gave it partial support. Otaku collect anime figurines. Otaku were significantly more likely to collect figurines than non-otaku anime fans, but again, it's below the midpoint, so we gave it partial support. Otaku love computers, so we had a measure of different types of technology usage, and otaku did score significantly higher than non-otaku, and that's above the midpoint of the measure, so we said that one was supported. Otaku engage in piracy. So we had a measure of different ways that people consume anime, and these are the means. It was, I think, a 7-point scale. But what we're going to look at is the unofficial streaming and unofficial downloads. And we find otaku do score higher in terms of unofficial streaming and unofficial downloads than non-otaku. And especially for that unofficial streaming, that is above the midpoint of the measure. So we said that stereotype is supported. They do engage in piracy. Otaku frequently consume anime-themed pornography. So what we did, we asked about pornography in different ways. One is, was pornography their entry into the fandom? And otaku did score higher than non-otaku anime fans. That was still a little bit below the midpoint. Otaku also rated their degree or frequency of pornography consumption significantly higher. And otaku consumed more anime-themed pornography than non-otaku anime fans. But a couple of those are below the midpoints of the measure, so we gave it partial support for that stereotype. Otaku are lolicons. So what we did is we created a measure of attitudes toward sexualized representations of underage characters. And then we ran a factor analysis. We had 10 items, ran a factor analysis on that to see if any dimensions came out of it. We found 2 big dimensions and then 1 item did not load. So the dimensions were the importance of lowly characters, for example, the importance to the fandom, but also toward whatever the anime is. And then another dimension was the attitude that sexualized representations of lowlies are not harmful. And other items that fell into that same dimension was it is not child pornography. And there are some example items from that dimension. And then the single item that didn't load on either factor was sexualized representations of lowly characters makes anime fandom look bad to non-fans. So here's the breakdown of how otaku and non-otaku scored on those 2 dimensions in that single item that didn't load on either dimension. Otaku scored higher with respect to the importance of lowlies for the fandom and for anime. And that's slightly above the midpoint. And then otaku did score higher on the dimension about lowlies not being harmful. And that is well above the midpoint. So they're endorsed. This is not consumption of sexualized characters. This is just attitudes. So that's as much as the data can tell you in terms of what this means. And then everybody agreed that sexualized representations of lowly characters harm the image of the anime community. But there was, and that was significantly different. So we gave that one partial support in terms of we don't have actual frequency of consumption, but we do have attitudes towards lowly characters. So there might be some truth to it. Otaku use anime as escapism. In terms of, if you just ask the motivations for belonging to the anime fandom, the highest ones are entertainment and escapism, but you also find escapism as a high motivator across multiple fandoms, not just anime. And otaku did score significantly higher, and it's well above the midpoint, so we gave that one support. Otaku use the anime fandom as a way to belong to a group. So we had a measure of belongingness as a motivator for being part of the anime fandom. Otaku did score higher on that measure, and it was above the midpoint, so we said that one was supported. Otaku cling to traditional gender roles. So what we did is we gave a measure of traditional gender role endorsement, and what we found is that otaku did not differ with respect to male gender roles, but it was above the midpoint for anime fans in general, endorsing that. Slightly above the midpoint, but still above. And then otaku did not differ from other anime fans with respect to female gender roles, but again, that's above the midpoint. So it wasn't a distinguishing feature. They're clinging to gender roles, but all anime fans tended to support the gender role, so partial support. Otaku are elitist. What we did was we created a measure of elitism in fandoms and gave it to anime fans. And when we created that measure, we found two different dimensions of elitism. One was derogating other fans, and then the second dimension was self-inflating, so talking positively about yourself in a way that was elitist. So otaku did not differ with respect to derogation of others, but they were significantly higher on self-inflation. And we should note that both of these dimensions, everybody was scoring below the midpoint of the scale, so they're not necessarily endorsing elitist attitudes. But otaku were significantly different, so we gave partial support. Otaku expect others to think poorly of them. We gave measures of personal and group discrimination. So group discrimination is, I think the anime fans are discriminated against. Personal discrimination is, I think I've been discriminated against because I'm an anime fan. Otaku did score higher on group discrimination, perception of group discrimination, and otaku did score higher on perception that they've been personally discriminated against. But they're both below the midpoint. So we gave that one partial support. Otaku hide their power level or their fan identity from others. So we asked, well, how much do you disclose your anime fan identity to various other people? So like close contacts, family, friends, and then more distant other people in one's life. And the interesting part is how much they disclose to non-close relatives and friends. They did score higher and than we would expect, but it is below the midpoint. In other words, they are hiding their identity to some extent, so we give that one partial support. Otaku are dysfunctional and experience poor well-being. We've given various indicators of well-being over the years in our research. Here's just a few of them. And what we find is only on two were otaku higher than non-otaku. And those effect sizes, the 0.002, the 0.001 are very low, indicating that that difference isn't very meaningful. We would have expected if the effect size to be higher, that would tell us it's meaningful. So on all of these other measures of well-being, indicators of well-being, there was no difference. And it tends to be pretty good in terms of above the midpoint. So that stereotype that otaku are dysfunctional in terms of well-being was not supported. Otaku overconsume anime and lack balance and control. Here are some examples of these items in terms of their overspending and things like that. Otaku differed, but it was not that big of a difference, and it was below the midpoint of the measure. So otaku are not lacking balance or some sort of control, so that stereotype was not supported. All right, so overall, we went through 36 stereotypes that we found in the literature about otaku. We found support for 11 of them. We found partial support for 14 of them, and then 11 were not supported. There's one big limitation to this study, most of because our research is done in English. If you do not speak English, you cannot participate. I found this one quote where anime producer said that otaku in Japan are kind of twisted, scary people who have issues. American otaku tend to be very cute and pure. So because our data is mostly from Western people, that could be one reason. Again, if you want to find our website, just Google Anime Research Project, you'll find us. And our next study is going to be up in August. Thank you. Questions?
Yes, please.
So first question, can you go back to the one where they showed that otaku are middle class?
We've got a question about the middle class status.
That's way back.
Just so you know, these recordings will be available in a week or two, and the written up versions of the reports will be published in August.
How do you determine the significant difference between the non-otaku and otaku? I'm thinking about a 4K difference in need. How do you determine that's significant?
How do you determine significance in your ranking between otaku and a non-otaku?
So what we did is at the beginning of our surveys, we usually have a long list of various aspects or subgroups within the community. And so participants would click on, it says I am, and then they would click on a button that indicates otaku. And then what we do is and then we have, the various measures, and using stats, we can see if one group, the people who clicked on the I am an otaku button versus the people who did not click on that button, whether or not their means are different from one another.
Yes.
So do you think that the stigma around the term otaku might result in some people who we would classically identify as otaku not self-identify and be put into the non-otaku category for the study? And could that confound the statistical results as a whole?
Yeah, definitely people can place you into a category label. We did not. We relied on people to self-disclose whether or not they believe they're an otaku or not. And the larger issue is what it means to be an otaku in Japan could very much differ from what people who called themselves otaku in our research view otaku as. Because it's definitely more stigmatized in Japan than it is in Western parts, where people are just like, I know, I've watched a bunch of anime and therefore I'm an otaku.
Okay.